Hello and welcome. Today, we delve into a story that forever changed underwater warfare. The moment when the ocean's silence was shattered by a sharp, metallic ping, revealing that the once invisible submarine was now exposed. Imagine a young German sailor gripping his periscope, trembling, not from fear of enemies above, but from the chilling sound that echoed through the steel walls of his vessel, signaling that the depths no longer concealed them. Could it be that the vast, shadowy ocean was no longer a sanctuary but a trap? How did a simple sound, a piercing, metallic toll, become the harbinger of doom for countless U-boat crews? Why did the seemingly invincible stealth of the German submarines turn into a death sentence? And what secret technology turned the tide of the Battle of the Atlantic against them? Were these submarines truly silent, or was their silence an illusion? Did the Allies develop a method capable of seeing through the water itself, something as revolutionary as sonar, before the Germans fully realized the threat? Could a device as small as a quartz crystal or a bubble decoy deceive the most advanced detection systems? And why, despite decades of effort, did the Germans underestimate the power of sound waves until it was too late? The central question is, how did the seemingly impenetrable ocean become the battleground where silence was broken and the hunted became the hunters? And what does this story reveal about the relentless march of technological progress that reshaped warfare forever? In this video, we will trace the incredible journey from early sonar experiments, primitive, unreliable, yet promising, through the rapid development of sophisticated active and passive systems, culminating in the deadly precision of three-dimensional underwater tracking. We will uncover how these advances transformed the ocean from a hiding place into a battlefield of sound, exposing the myth of submarine invincibility and turning the tide decisively in favor of the Allies. We promise to walk the entire path, from the first metallic pings to the drowned wrecks, and unravel how science, engineering, and human resilience combined to produce a new era of naval dominance. And now, the most gripping part begins. The moment when the silent predator was finally hunted down, right now. On the 25th of May in the year 1941, deep within the vast and unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic, an ominous event was unfolding approximately 500 nautical miles south of Cape Farewell, Greenland. It was a moment fraught with tension and silent dread, as a young midshipman aboard the German submarine U-557 found his hand trembling involuntarily as he gripped the handles of the periscope. This trembling was not caused by fear of adversaries lurking above the waves, but rather by the harrowing sound that had just reverberated through the very steel walls of their vessel. A sharp, metallic ping, unlike any noise they had trained for or encountered before, had struck the submarine's hull with a piercing clarity, echoing ominously through every compartment and filling the crew with a foreboding sense of dread. Herbert Vierer, who served as a young officer aboard U-557, later documented this chilling moment in his private journal. Decades after the war's end, he reflected poignantly, remarking that the sound was unlike any they had prepared for. A metallic toll that echoed through their submarine like a somber church bell announcing a funeral. It was the unmistakable signal that the British forces had finally located them beneath the ocean's surface, shattering the illusion of safety that the dark waters had long provided to German U-boat crews. For nearly 3 years, these submariners had operated under the false assumption that the depths of the ocean offered complete refuge from enemy detection. They believed that once submerged, they would effectively vanish into the abyss, concealed by the darkness of the sea just as night cloaked a surface vessel. The ocean had been their sanctuary, a realm where stealth and silent movement were their greatest weapons. Yet, On that fateful spring morning in 1941, the young crew of 22-year-old Vera and the 48 men serving aboard U-557 learned an agonizingly different truth: that the vast, shadowy ocean was no longer a shield. Unbeknownst to them, the Allies had developed and deployed technology capable of seeing through the water itself, piercing the depths with sound and light in ways that were previously unimaginable. What none of these submariners grasped at that moment was that the piercing ping they heard was merely the opening note of a new era in underwater warfare, one driven not by torpedoes or conventional weapons, but by the revolutionary power of sound waves. This incident marked the beginning of a technological symphony that would fundamentally alter the nature of submarine combat forever. Over the subsequent 4 years, German U-boat crews would endure a systematic and relentless psychological assault, as Allied sonar and detection systems evolved rapidly from primitive prototypes into highly precise, formidable hunting tools. The mathematics of underwater warfare was being rewritten, no longer focused solely on torpedo calculations or physical concealment, but now centered on the manipulation and interpretation of sound waves. These innovations would expose the U-boat fleet to destruction on an unprecedented scale, ultimately marking the decline of Germany's once formidable dominance beneath the waves. The fall of German submarine supremacy was not an abrupt event but the culmination of a long and arduous development process that had its origins over 23 years earlier, during the final tumultuous months of the First World War. British and French scientists, driven by urgency and desperation to counter the formidable U-boat threat that threatened to starve Britain into submission, began experimenting with means of detecting underwater sound. Their early efforts laid the groundwork for what would become a revolutionary shift in anti-submarine warfare. During that war, the Royal Navy's Anti-Submarine Division operated out of specialized shore-based laboratories, where they pioneered the first rudimentary sonar sets, primitive devices designed to detect submerged vessels. These early systems, however, were limited in scope and reliability. With the war ending before these developments could be widely deployed, only a handful of U-boats during the conflict had been detected using hydrophones, the technology that would later revolutionize the fight beneath the waves. This embryonic technology, known colloquially as underwater sound detection, was slow to evolve but held immense promise. Throughout the 1920s and 30s, British scientists at institutions such as His Majesty's ship Osprey, which served as the Royal Navy's anti-submarine training and research establishment located at Portland, dedicated themselves to refining the basic principles of underwater sound detection. Their work yielded a system known as Azdic, a pioneering technology that transmitted high-frequency sound pulses through the water. When these pulses encountered a solid object, such as a submerged vessel or wreck, they reflected back, creating an echo. By measuring the time elapsed between sending the pulse and receiving its echo, operators could accurately determine the distance to the target. Additionally, by rotating the transmitter and receiver, they could ascertain the direction or bearing of the detected object. These early Azdic units, which first saw operational deployment in 1928 aboard British destroyers, marked a significant step forward in underwater detection technology. However, they were crude by today's standards, clunky and limited the device known as the oscillator, a tiny yet critical component comprising a quartz crystal disc, played a vital role in transforming electrical signals into audible sound waves that could be interpreted by operators. This piece of equipment had to be carefully suspended above the side of the ship to function correctly, a delicate setup considering the constraints of the vessel's structure. Under ideal conditions, the range of this system was limited to approximately 3,500 yards, making it effective only within a relatively short distance. Importantly, This sonar system was designed not to provide precise depth measurements but rather to establish the direction and proximity of underwater objects. Operators, equipped with headphones, faced the challenging task of distinguishing genuine submarine echoes from a myriad of other underwater anomalies. These false signals could be caused by sounds bouncing off whales, schools of fish, the wakes of ships, or various thermal layers within the water column. Despite these difficulties, by the year of 1939, the British Royal Navy had developed considerable confidence in the capabilities of the Azdic system. Senior naval officials believed that the threat posed by submarines had been largely mitigated, if not fully neutralized. Every destroyer in the Royal Navy fleet was equipped with this sonar technology, and numerous training establishments were dedicated to producing hundreds of skilled operators capable of interpreting its signals. Naval strategic plans at that time anticipated that convoys protected by escorts armed with Azdic would suffer minimal losses, giving rise to a false sense of security in anticipation of a swift victory over submarine threats. However, this confidence proved to be disastrously premature. The war officially commenced on the 3rd of September in the year of 1939. Mere hours following Britain's declaration of war against Germany, the passenger liner Athenia was torpedoed by the German U-boat U-30 west of Ireland, resulting in the tragic loss of 117 lives. This event marked the beginning of the Battle of the Atlantic, and German submarine commanders quickly realized that the formidable British anti-submarine defenses were not as effective as they had been led to believe. Navigator Captain Otto Kretschmer Prien and Commander Joachim Schepke led their submarine crews on relentless patrols along enemy shipping routes, sinking vessels one after another with remarkably few losses themselves. Admiral Karl Donitz, commanding the German U-boat fleet, watched these successes with evident satisfaction as his submarines achieved what was famously known as the first happy time, a period of apparent dominance. German submariners operated with a cultivated confidence in their stealth and invincibility, reinforced by the belief that their submerged vessels were nearly impossible to detect. Naval training emphasized the notion that a submarine operating fully submerged was effectively invisible to enemy detection. Teachers and instructors explained that the vast ocean absorbed sound waves and effectively masked any movement. Hydrophones, underwater microphones, could detect the noise of a submarine's propellers if surfaced, or if submerged but running noisy machinery. Yet, if a submarine remained silent and used electric motors to move silently beneath the water, it was considered a ghost, impossible to detect. This doctrinal belief in the invincibility of submerged submarines was ingrained into every level of operational planning and execution. Feldwebel Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the senior radio operator aboard the U-boat U-109, kept a secret diary written in real time during patrols, recounting their confidence. He noted, "We believed the enemy relied on the same listening devices as in the last war. We were told their hydrophones could only detect loud machinery noise. As long as we maintained absolute silence after diving, we thought we were safe." Unfortunately, this widely held conviction was on the verge of being shattered, as new technological realities emerged. The first German U-boat crew to encounter an active sonar system experienced not only technological surprise but an existential shock that challenged everything they believed about underwater stealth. When an Azdic pulse was emitted and struck the submerged hull of a U-boat, the effect was startlingly clear to those inside. Survivors vividly described the experience as akin to drops of dried peas being dropped into a tin can, a rapid series of metallic clicks that increased in intensity as the searching ship closed in. This sound was unlike the steady, monotonous drone of ship propellers that could be heard through hydrophones. Instead, It was an unmistakably artificial noise, precise, directional, and highly alarming. Lieutenant Herbert Werner, serving as the watch officer aboard the U-boat U-557 during his inaugural war patrol in May 1941, vividly recalled his first encounter with active sonar detection while stalking a convoy south of Greenland. His memoir, titled Iron Coffins, recounts in harrowing detail how the silent confidence of the U-boat team was swiftly replaced by a sense of vulnerability and dread as the piercing ping of the sonar indicated their imminent exposure. This moment marked a significant turning point in submarine warfare, exposing the limitations of their previously unchallenged stealth and forcing a reassessment of underwater tactics in the face of emerging undersea detection technologies. Decades later, the film footage captured the exact moment that altered their fate forever. The destroyer's Azdic system, a marvel of military technology, detected their submarine while it was at periscope depth, and the metallic pinging echoed through the water, growing steadily louder and faster with each passing second. Every single ping reverberated against their hull, sending shockwaves through the vessel's metal frame and resonating within the tight confines of the submarine's interior. The crew members, each at their designated stations, froze instinctively, fully aware that the peril was no longer a distant threat but an imminent reality. It became painfully clear that the enemy above had pinpointed their precise location, stripping away any semblance of stealth they once possessed. In that fleeting moment, the status of the submarine shifted dramatically from that of a predator lurking covertly beneath the waves to that of a hunted target. The rapid transformation from hunter to prey unfolded in mere seconds, a visceral switch that left no room for hesitation. Vera, a young sailor of only 22 years and fresh from graduating from the Naval Academy just 6 months prior, watched with growing unease as his commanding officer's face visibly changed. The confident, commanding expression that once signified control now reflected caution, wariness, and the stark realization of their dire predicament. Captain Lodent Ottorpulsion, a seasoned officer who had already led several successful patrols, swiftly issued the orders that would define the tense hours ahead. Without wasting a moment, he commanded the submarine to dive to a depth of 200 meters, a depth carefully chosen to provide some cover and reduce the chances of detection. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, executing the maneuvers they had rehearsed countless times. Yet, beneath this veneer of calm professionalism, every man understood the gravity of the situation. The very technology that had once granted them invisibility now betrayed them, stripping away their tactical advantage, exposing their presence to an adversary they scarcely understood. The British destroyer's Azdic operator, likely a young man himself, perhaps not much older than Vera, held a crucial advantage that transcended raw experience or technical skill. His equipment was capable of penetrating the depths of the ocean itself, constructing detailed acoustic images of objects located hundreds of yards away, a feat that made traditional visual reconnaissance seem primitive. This modern sonar system transmitted signals at a rapid rate of 14,000 cycles per second, a frequency far outside the range of human hearing but perfectly suited for deep water detection. When these sound waves collided with the steel hull of the submarine, they reflected back to hydrophones strategically placed beneath the destroyer's keel. Sophisticated mathematical calculations converted the tiny time delays between emission and reception into precise distance measurements, revealing the submarine's bearing based on the direction from which the echoes returned. Every subtle movement of the vessel was meticulously tracked, narrowing the possibilities of escape with each passing second. What ensued was a relentless 7-hour barrage of depth charge attacks. The submarine, designated U-557, descended further to 200 meters, engaging silent running procedures, deactivating non-essential systems to reduce noise and minimize detection. It then moved at a sluggish, barely perceptible pace, perhaps only a few knots, attempting to evade the encroaching danger. Overhead, the crew could hear the relentless thrashing of the destroyer's screws, the loud splash of depth charges entering the water, and the deafening detonation of each explosion. The shock waves coursed through the hull, causing the vessel to shudder violently. Chips of paint flaked off from bulkheads, and the intense vibrations shattered light bulbs, casting perceptible flickers amidst the darkness. In the confines of the submarine, chaos was replaced by a harrowing silence. Men bled from their ears and noses, the relentless pressure and noise assaulting their bodies. The vessel's structure groaned under the strain, each creak and crack a grim reminder of their peril. Inside, time seemed to stretch interminably, every second laden with anxiety and desperation. The captain issued a critical command: to shut down all non-essential systems, allowing the electric motors to operate at a bare minimum, pushing the submarine through the water at no more than 2 knots. The crew moved with painstaking slowness, each motion deliberate, every sound carefully suppressed, be it a dropped wrench, a slammed hatch, or the heavy footsteps of someone moving through the narrow passages, all to avoid betraying their position. They sat or stood at their stations immersed in near-total silence, their senses hyper-aware of every sound, every vibration, each breath audible in the thick, foul air. Inside the submarine, the temperature had climbed well past 35 degrees Celsius. Men, fatigued and drenched in sweat, shed their shirts, their skins glistening under the dim, flickering lights. Condensation formed on pipes and bulkheads, further dampening the already oppressive atmosphere. The air grew thick with the stench of unwashed bodies, diesel fuel, and mounting fear. Not merely a smell but a tangible presence that it had been repeatedly circulated through nearly 50 pairs of lungs, each cycle involving countless filtration and rebreathing. Overhead, the relentless destroyer loomed, an ever-present threat with its unwavering pursuit. The operator aboard the Azdic sonar system maintained a steady, unwavering contact, refusing to let go of the contact point despite growing pressure. Every few minutes, the metallic pings emitted by the sonar intensified, their sharp, echoing tones signaling that the predator was rapidly closing in for yet another lethal strike. The crew instinctively braced themselves, bodies clutching onto sturdy stanchions and pressing tightly against bulkheads in a desperate attempt to maintain their composure amid the chaos. Suddenly, the water erupted with violent splashes, the horrifying sounds of depth charges plunging into the ocean's depths. They would fall in quick succession, sometimes 3, sometimes as many as 10. Each explosion reverberating through the submarine's metal frame, the shockwaves threatening to rupture it entirely. The torment of waiting grew almost unbearable. Crew members counted seconds with tense anticipation. 7 seconds for charges set to detonate at 100 meters, 12 seconds for those at 200 meters, and 20 seconds for 300. When the moment arrived, the explosions came with brutal force, causing the entire vessel to shudder violently. Closer detonations lifted the submarine bodily from the seafloor, tossing sailors off their feet and into the air. The hull groaned under the strain, creaking and popping as it endured the assault. Fragments of cork insulation rained down from overhead, while electrical sparks flickered erratically from damaged control panels. Leaks began to appear along the pressure hull, thin jets of seawater spraying under immense pressure into the interior. Damage control teams scrambled into action, swiftly plugging cracks with wooden plugs, tightening bolts on compromised pipe joints, and reinforcing weakened frames in a frantic effort to stave off catastrophe. After enduring nearly 7 hours of relentless attack, the U-557 had descended to a depth of roughly 280 meters, well beyond its designed crush depth of 220 meters. The hull was under tremendous stress, contracting under the crushing pressure, rivets groaning, seams weeping, as the vessel fought to hold itself together. Yet, Captain Pulsion understood his submarine intimately. He trusted that German engineering had incorporated adequate safety margins into its design. Nonetheless, he was painfully aware that surfacing to shallower waters would mean detection and certain destruction. Therefore, he chose to remain deep, maintaining silence in the dark abyss, waiting patiently for the destroyer's fuel supply to dwindle or for the captain's patience to wear thin. At last, the relentless pinging fell silent. The propeller noise from the destroyer faded into the distance, indicating that either the British captain had lost confidence in his sonar contact or was forced to turn back due to dwindling fuel reserves. U-557 lingered in the depths for another 2 hours, orientation lost but steadfast. Then, slowly and carefully, the submarine began its ascent toward the surface. When it finally surfaced after nearly 9 hours submerged, crew members staggered onto the conning tower and drew in deep, ragged breaths of the crisp Atlantic air. Several of them retched from the sudden rush of oxygen, their bodies overwhelmed by the relief and shock of survival. Others simply stood quietly, faces turned upward to the sky, savoring the rare moment of victory amid the chaos. The U-557 had survived, a feat shared by thousands of German submarines during the early years of the war. The Allied Azdic operators aboard escort ships faced critical limitations despite their technological advances. Their sonar systems, while capable of detecting U-boats like the U-557, suffered from a significant blind spot, a dead zone just under 200 yards. Within this range, the sonar signals and their echoes merged into a confusing blur, leaving the attacking ship effectively blind as it closed for the kill. Because of this, depth charges could only be deployed after the submarine had been detected and identified, usually from behind, thus giving the clever and experienced U-boat commanders just a few precious seconds to execute evasive maneuvers before the deadly explosion. Furthermore, the performance of Azdic sonar systems declined markedly in rough seas, where the water's temperature layers, called thermoclines, disrupted the propagation of sound waves. These thermoclines bent the sonar signals, creating shadow zones where submarines could hide in complete silence. Skilled U-boat commanders learned to exploit this phenomenon by diving beneath the thermoclines, where the loud, predictable sonar beams of their pursuers could not reach. They mastered the art of silent running, shutting down all non-essential machinery, and moving at carefully controlled speeds so low that the vessel could remain undetected for extended periods even as surface ships scoured the ocean above. The careful, deliberate reduction of a submarine's propeller speed served a crucial purpose. It prevented the creation of cavitation, those destructive bubbles that produce telltale noise and vibrations easily detected by enemy sonar equipment. Even a solitary step taken by a crew member, walking too heavily on the deck, could inadvertently reveal the presence of a submarine, exposing its stealthy position to vigilant observers. Throughout the years of 1940 and 1941, such meticulous tactics allowed German submarines to operate with a surprising degree of effectiveness, despite the ever-improving sonar technologies employed by Allied forces. The experience gained over time proved invaluable, especially for seasoned commanders who had already faced their initial encounters with Allied detection methods. Officers like Vierer, who had survived their first brush with Azdic, or Azdic, detection, became students of the technology's weaknesses. They observed that when multiple escort ships worked together, each transmitting signals on different frequencies, the resulting acoustic interference made it difficult for the enemy to pinpoint a submarine's exact location, creating a confusing soundscape that hindered effective tracking. In addition, German submariners discovered that they could exploit the acoustic noise barrier generated by a convoy of merchant ships. The collective noise produced by dozens of engines and propellers, sometimes 50 or more, created a dense sonic environment that effectively masked the presence of a lone submarine. This natural cacophony served as a shield, making it harder for enemy sonar to distinguish a submarine's faint signature against the background noise of the convoy. Fundamentally different from their Allied counterparts, the German Navy relied on a distinct approach to underwater detection. Instead of deploying active sonar pulses that bounced sound waves off objects to locate them, German engineers focused on passive listening systems, devices designed solely to detect sounds produced by other vessels. One of the key innovations was the Grin-Horschardt, or group listening device, which had been standard equipment on the U-boat-class U-boat since 1935. This array consisted of 48 hydrophones mounted along each side of the submarine's bow, serving as an extensive underwater microphone network. These hydrophone arrays had impressive detection ranges. They could pick up signals from individual ships at distances of approximately 20 kilometers, roughly 12 miles, and from entire convoys at distances nearing 100 kilometers, about 60 miles. Although their directional accuracy, or bearing determination, was limited, these systems provided vital intelligence for planning torpedo attacks. This technological philosophy reflected a core aspect of German strategic thinking. The U-boat was conceived as a hunter, actively seeking out enemy shipping rather than trying to evade detection itself. They believed that their listening equipment was sufficiently sophisticated to locate targets with high precision, under the assumption that the Allies' passive systems would be similarly reliant on sound detection. The Germans underestimated a crucial factor: the Allies' active sonar capabilities, which involved emitting sound waves and analyzing the reflections to find submerged submarines. They considered the possibility that the enemy might use reflected sound to actively track and locate U-boats as unlikely or even insane planning. For example, in his patrol report from October of 1940, Captain Herbert Schulzer, commanding the U-48, noted confidently that British anti-submarine measures were inadequate. He observed that their listening devices compelled the Germans to make noise intentionally, believing that silent running would prevent detection and thus be the most secure method of avoiding discovery. This assessment was widely shared among U-boat commanders at the time and, in hindsight, would turn out to be catastrophically wrong. The year of 1942 marked a turning point in the Battle of the Atlantic, bringing with it significant and devastating shifts in the maritime battlefield. Although initially unrecognized by many German submariners, the pattern of Allied success grew increasingly clear. In February, Admiral Donitz's U-boats began operating along the U.S. East Coast, capitalizing on America's complete lack of preparedness for submarine warfare and exploiting vulnerabilities in the defenses. This period, often referred to as the Second Happy Time, saw merchant ships sailing under brightly lit shorelines, often unescorted and sailing independently, just as aimless targets, making them easy prey. Hundreds of ships were sunk during this period, creating a sense of chaos and vulnerability among Allied shipping. The Germans nicknamed this phase the American shooting season, due to the relentless success of their U-boats. Meanwhile, British and American scientists were working tirelessly to revolutionize anti-submarine warfare. Recognizing that only a unified, collaborative research effort could develop the necessary countermeasures quickly enough, Britain had transferred its Azdic technology to the United States free of charge by September of 1940. This transfer marked the beginning of a concerted effort to improve underwater detection. American engineers working at the Naval Research Laboratory in Washington embarked on the development of what they called sonar, an acronym for sound navigation and ranging, a system designed to actively emit acoustic signals and analyze the returning echoes to locate submerged submarines. By early 1942, the development and deployment of sonar technology during wartime represented a remarkable feat of international cooperation and scientific ingenuity. British scientists and engineers, working under the pressures of war, flew across the Atlantic to Washington with detailed blueprints, comprehensive operational manuals, and even actual Azdic equipment, some of which had been salvaged from Royal Navy destroyers. Their goal was clear: to share their technological advancements with their American counterparts in a bid to collectively enhance Allied anti-submarine efforts. Once in America, American engineers meticulously examined every aspect of the British designs, applying their own industrial techniques and innovations to improve both the manufacturing process and the performance of the systems. Initially, the British used quartz crystal transducers, which they assembled entirely by hand, producing only limited quantities due to the labor-intensive nature of manufacturing. Recognizing the need for mass production, American engineers devised magnetostrictive transducers composed of nickel tubes. These could be manufactured on a much larger scale and integrated into widespread military use. Meanwhile, the British employed streamlined protective domes made of specialized materials to encase the transducers. The Americans experimented with spherical dome shapes, which offered superior acoustic properties by providing more effective sound transmission and reception. This collaboration went well beyond the exchange of hardware. Royal Navy officers generously shared their extensive operational experience, instructing American anti-submarine warfare personnel in the nuances of sonar operation. They conveyed critical insights about how temperature stratification in the ocean could influence sonar beams, how skilled submarine commanders exploited dead zones, areas where sonar signals were less effective, and how seasoned operators could distinguish genuine submarine echoes from false returns caused by marine life or other underwater objects. By transferring this wealth of knowledge, they effectively condensed what might have taken years of independent learning into just a few months of intensive training. This rapid knowledge transfer allowed American forces to develop robust and effective anti-submarine capabilities far more swiftly than they could have through trial and error alone. By the middle of the year 1942, American shipyards were busy outfitting every destroyer, destroyer escort, and corvette with sophisticated sonar equipment, integrating these systems into ships as they rolled off assembly lines. The United States Maritime Commission coordinated this enormous effort to ensure a high degree of standardization across all vessels. Such uniformity meant that parts could be swapped seamlessly between ships, operators could transfer from one vessel to another without requiring additional retraining, and tactical doctrines could be uniformly applied across the entire fleet. This standardization was vital to maintaining operational efficiency and ensuring that all ships could effectively carry out anti-submarine patrols and engagements. The sheer scale of American industrial output transformed sonar from a specialized British naval technology into a widely available and essential Allied weapon in the fight against submerged enemy submarines. Three major technical improvements played pivotal roles in elevating sonar from a useful but somewhat limited tool into an effective, precision-guided submarine hunter. The first breakthrough was the implementation of power rotation systems, replacing manual hand-cranked mechanisms with electric motors capable of scanning the sonar head through wider arcs, up to 90 degrees, in mere seconds. Previously, manual rotation required significant time and effort, limiting the area that could be covered in a given period. These electric motors enabled escorts to scan the entire forward hemisphere, from port to starboard, within moments, substantially increasing their chances of detecting elusive submarines. The second critical advancement involved the development of streamlined steel domes that encased the transducers. Early versions used canvas covers, which, at high speeds, created turbulent water flow that produced additional noise, masking the true echoes from submarines. By utilizing wind tunnel testing and hydrodynamic analyses, engineers crafted steel domes with smooth, hydrodynamic shapes that allowed water to flow effortlessly around the transducer even at speeds of up to 20 knots, significantly faster than the previous limit of 15 knots. This innovation meant escort vessels could maintain high speeds during searches and approach submarines rapidly without risking the loss of sonar contact, increasing the likelihood of successful engagements. The third major enhancement involved the adoption of dual-frequency systems, allowing sonar to operate at multiple frequencies simultaneously or sequentially. Although this part of the development was complex, it permitted more effective discrimination between real submarine echoes and false signals, further sharpening the ability of escorts to identify and track submerged threats under diverse underwater conditions. These technological improvements collectively made sonar a versatile, powerful tool capable of adapting to varying tactical scenarios and dramatically improving the success rate of anti-submarine operations during the war. In essence, what started as a limited British technological innovation was transformed through collaborative effort and industrial-scale manufacturing into a formidable and widespread anti-submarine weapon system that played a crucial role in securing Allied maritime dominance. The combined advancements in transducer design, mechanical rotation, hydrodynamic shielding, and multi-frequency operation laid the foundation for anti-submarine warfare that could reliably detect, track, and destroy enemy submarines, a critical factor in safeguarding vital shipping lanes and ensuring the success of Allied naval strategies during the conflict. The simultaneous operation of sonar systems at both 14 and 30 kilocycles marked a significant leap forward in underwater detection technology, dramatically enhancing both the range and the clarity of submarine tracking. Lower frequency waves, with their ability to travel vast distances through the dense medium of seawater, allowed vessels to detect submarines from afar, although at the expense of precise directional information. These signals could illuminate the presence of an underwater target miles away but would provide only broad bearings, making it difficult to determine the exact position or orientation of the enemy vessel. Conversely, high-frequency sonar pulses produced sharper, more detailed echoes capable of revealing fine structural features of a submarine once within closer proximity. However, these higher frequencies were quickly absorbed and scattered by seawater, severely limiting their effective range. Prior to this development, operators faced a fundamental compromise: use low frequencies for broad detection but lack accuracy, or employ high frequencies for precision but with limited reach. The innovative strategy was to combine both frequency ranges, leveraging their respective strengths. Operators could initially deploy low-frequency signals, allowing them to detect and track submarines over longer distances, and then switch to high-frequency pulses as they closed in, honing in on the target with pinpoint accuracy. Some advanced sonar systems went a step further by automatically alternating between the two frequencies within a single sweep, providing a seamless integration of distant detection and close-range precision, thereby maximizing operational effectiveness. Among these technological breakthroughs, the most revolutionary was the development of the Type 147 Azdic system in the year 1943. Unlike earlier models, this sophisticated equipment was capable of three-dimensional tracking of submarines. It did not merely relay bearing and distance, it also determined the target's depth, giving Allied escort vessels a comprehensive understanding of the submarine's position within the full scope of the underwater environment. This advancement allowed the deployment of depth charges with unprecedented accuracy, targeting enemy vessels at precisely the right depth, increasing the likelihood of successful attacks and minimizing wasted ammunition. The once quiet underwater refuge for German submarines and their crews was rapidly vanishing. As the Allies' sonar technology advanced, German U-boat crews, specialized underwater operators, began experiencing an inexplicable surge in detection success. Oberleutnant Wehrer, promoted to first watch officer aboard the U-230 in late 1942, was among those who observed these chilling changes firsthand. Reflecting on the period before these innovations, Wehrer recounted that in 1941, if a submarine managed to dive deep and maintain silence, it could often evade detection altogether, with the escorts losing contact within an hour. By 1943, however, German submarines could be tracked continuously for 5, 6, or even 7 hours. The enemy escorts seemed to possess an uncanny ability to determine their depth with startling accuracy. The devastating pattern of depth charges exploding at the submarine's precise depth became almost routine. It was as if the adversary's sonar systems could see right through the water, pinpointing the submarine's exact location in real time. This technological reality was slow for German naval intelligence to fully comprehend. Despite their initial assumptions, it was evident that the Allies had not merely refined their sonar equipment but had fundamentally revolutionized it. The introduction of the Type 147 Azdic, capable of simultaneous three-dimensional tracking, rendered the German U-boat tactics, designed against earlier, two-dimensional systems, obsolete overnight. Submarines could no longer rely on diving to safe depths for protection, nor could they assume that silent running would guarantee concealment. Course changes and evasive maneuvers that once disrupted contact no longer proved effective. The psychological toll on submarine crews was profound. Unlike surface fleet engagements, where adversaries were visible and could be confronted directly, underwater battles often became a passive waiting game. As destroyers relentlessly hunted, the constant, insistent pinging of sonar against the hull created an oppressive atmosphere. Each ping symbolized that an escort was actively calculating their exact position, narrowing down their location with unerring precision. Men aboard submarines understood that as the sonar signals persisted, their chances of avoiding death diminished rapidly. They knew depth charges were being set at their precise depths, ready to be unleashed at a moment's notice, with death likely to arrive in seconds. The only warning was the ominous splash of charges entering the water overhead. The incessant sound was maddening. Resembling a fingernail dragging across a slate surface, amplified to an unbearable degree and echoing through thick steel hulls. This sonic assault penetrated every compartment of the vessel. Men in the forward torpedo room could hear the relentless pinging as clearly as those in the engine spaces aft. No matter where they sought refuge within the submarine, escaping the deafening noise was impossible. Some crew members tried to block it out by stuffing cotton into their ears, but the sound traveled through the hull itself, through deck plates and airspaces, making silence impossible. It was constant, unyielding, and utterly relentless. What was most terrifying about this relentless noise was what it represented: an unambiguous sign that every submarine sailor understood the fundamental principles of physics that governed underwater detection. Sound waves, the primary tool for locating and tracking enemy vessels, traveled through water at approximately 1,500 meters per second. When an Azdic operator emitted a sound pulse, a ping, and subsequently received its echo after a certain interval, the distance to the target could be calculated with relative ease. For instance, if an echo was detected 2 seconds after the initial sound was transmitted, the submarine was roughly 1,500 meters away from the source of the reflection. This straightforward calculation involved simple division, dividing the total time taken for the echo to return by 2, since the sound had to travel to the target and back, then multiplying by the known speed of sound in water. The echo's origin indicated the direction from which it had come, providing the bearing of the target. By 1943, the evolution of sonar technology into the three-dimensional Azdic system allowed operators not only to determine the bearing but also to assess the angle at which sound waves reflected off targets. This three-dimensional capability enabled submariners to estimate the precise depth of enemy vessels or underwater obstacles, giving them a critical tactical advantage in navigating and hunting beneath the surface. For the submarine's hunters, those above the water, there was no hiding. Every aspect of a submerged enemy vessel's position was at the mercy of the relentless sound waves and the technological tools that interpreted them. The German U-boat commander Feldwebel Hirschfeld, whose vessel U-109 endured multiple depth-charge attacks throughout early 2042 and into early 2043, recorded the harrowing reality in his diary. His entries reveal that the constant pinging, an incessant, almost maddening sonar noise, never ceased. It persisted relentlessly, hour after hour, day and night. In a desperate attempt to conserve battery power, the crew sat in darkness, their senses strained and heightened by the oppressive silence around them, broken only by the persistent sound of their own sonar pings. The atmosphere on board grew increasingly foul, the cabin air thickened with the buildup of carbon dioxide, and the men started to gasp for every breath, their physical and mental endurance pushed to its limit. Despite the exhaustion and the rising anxiety, the relentless sonar signals continued to scan above them, revealing that enemy ships and aircraft were circling overhead, waiting for the right moment to strike. When the dreaded splashes of depth charges echoed through the depths, the crew would instinctively count 1, 2, 5, 10. Each number representing multiple explosive devices detonating around them. Afterwards, they would hold their breath, trembling in anticipation, as the explosions rocked the submarine and sent shockwaves through its hull. The sailors wondered, with dreadful certainty, whether this relentless pattern of attack might finally breach their defenses, flooding their vessel with seawater and ending their mission, perhaps even their lives. Hirschfeld's diary entries from the early months of 1943 vividly depict this deteriorating mental state among the crew. Confident warriors just months earlier, now transformed into survivors haunted by fear. Many sailors would shake uncontrollably for hours after a severe depth-charge assault, their bodies trembling with shock. Some refused to eat, their stomachs knotted with anxiety and dread. Others sought refuge in unconsciousness, collapsing into sleep whenever the opportunity arose, hoping to escape the relentless terror for a brief moment. A few would break down completely, filled with tears or rendered motionless, overwhelmed by the weight of their fear and uncertainty. The ship's captains endeavored to bolster morale through routine and discipline, maintaining daily drills, ensuring equipment was kept in working order, and keeping watch shifts active. Yet, beneath these efforts, everyone aboard knew the grim truth. the vast ocean that once shielded them was no longer a safe haven. The technological advances that had previously made submarines formidable weapons, the keen sonar, the stealthy design, had been countered by new developments that turned the tables. Enemy forces had introduced better detection systems and tactics, making submarines increasingly vulnerable rather than invincible. The balance of power had shifted decisively, and no amount of German engineering brilliance or courage could alter that reality. The spring of 1943 marked the climax of the Battle of the Atlantic, reaching its most intense phase. In March alone, German U-boats sank an astonishing 120 merchant ships, totaling nearly 700,000 tons of Allied shipping, while suffering only about 12 submarine losses. A close examination of the sinking patterns reveals that nearly two-thirds of these ships were destroyed while sailing in convoy, a strategic formation that was the backbone of Allied maritime defense. For 20 days in that month, the German Wolfpack tactics brought them dangerously close to severing Britain's vital transatlantic supply lines. Later, the Royal Navy's official history would state that the Germans had never come so close to disrupting the critical flow of supplies and communication between the New World and the Old. Nevertheless, the month of March 1943 represented the zenith of the U-boat's operational effectiveness, not the dawn of a formidable long-range Liberator aircraft, equipped with both advanced radar and sonobuoys, managed to close the expansive mid-Atlantic air gap where previously only land-based aircraft had operated, surpassing the limitations of land proximity to hunt down and attack submarines. By May of 1943, this period would come to be known as Black May for the German Navy's marine forces, marking a devastating chapter in their underwater war campaign. During this brutal month, a staggering total of 41 U-boat submarines were destroyed, accounting for approximately a quarter of their operational fleet, a catastrophic loss rate that shook the German submarine force to its core. On the 24th of May, Admiral Donitz, deeply shaken by these staggering figures and the relentless attrition his submarine fleet was experiencing, issued an order for the temporary withdrawal of U-boats from the North Atlantic theater. In his war diary, he documented the gravity of the situation, writing, "We are now confronting a scenario where enemy efforts to restrict and eliminate our operations have succeeded. Their sea and air anti-submarine units have grown exponentially in strength and efficacy. Our losses have become unsustainable, a testament to the alarming curve of destruction that had overtaken their underwater campaign." The raw statistics painted a brutally clear picture of the crisis. During just the first 3 weeks of May alone, a total of 96 U-boats were deployed into the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic, yet 41 of these were lost, an astonishing loss rate of roughly 43%, with nearly half of the submarines failing to return from patrol, sinking beneath the waves never to be seen again. To put these figures into perspective, the entire year of 1941 had seen a total of only 35 U-boat losses from all causes, including accidents and combat. The comparison starkly underscored the severity of Black May. In just 3 weeks, more submarines had been destroyed than throughout the whole of the previous year, marking one of the most intense periods of underwater combat in the early years of the war. The cost of these losses extended beyond mere numbers. Each vessel represented a crew of brave sailors, their fates woven into a human story of courage and tragedy. The ratio of merchant ships sunk to U-boats lost had escalated dramatically. For every individual submarine lost, approximately 12 merchant vessels had gone to the bottom. 2 years earlier, the ratio had been more favorable. About 10 merchant ships lost for every U-boat per patrol, with most submarines returning safely to base, unscathed or lightly damaged. But now, The situation had reversed. Submarines were being destroyed at a rate faster than they could sink targets, underlining the increasing effectiveness of Allied anti-submarine warfare and the dire predicament facing the German flotillas. The stark human stories behind these statistics reveal the intense and often tragic encounters that defined this period. Take, for instance, the case of U-463, commanded by Captain Lieutenant Leo Wolfpower. On the 5th of May, the submarine was detected by a powerful Azdic sonar contact while stalking convoy on S5, an essential convoy route. Despite Wolfpower's desperate efforts to evade detection, the destroyer Vedette quickly established solid contact and maintained it despite numerous evasive maneuvers by the U-boat. For 3 harrowing hours, Wolfpower employed every tactic prescribed by German tactical doctrine, diving to great depths, constantly changing course, accelerating and decelerating unpredictably, and deploying bubble decoys in a final desperate attempt to escape. Yet, despite these efforts, the contact remained clear and unwavering. With his batteries nearly exhausted and the submarine sustaining damage from near-miss depth charges, Wolfpower made the fateful decision to surface and engage the destroyer with the deck gun. The destroyer's 4-inch guns struck swiftly, destroying U-463 within minutes, resulting in the loss of 46 men. Only 3 survived the sinking, a tragic human toll that underscored the peril of underwater combat. Similarly, on May 6, the submarine U-192, commanded by Oberleutnant Vera, found itself hunted relentlessly for 6 hours by escorts from convoy SC-129. The boat, under extreme pressure, descended to 300 meters, far beyond its designed operational limits. As the hull groaned and strained under the immense pressure underwater, leaks appeared in multiple locations, and the submarine's integrity was compromised. Nevertheless, the sonar operators above maintained perfect coordination, with one vessel holding the Azdic contact steadily while others orchestrated precise depth charge attacks. When the attack came, it was executed with pinpoint accuracy. Charges detonated exactly at 300 meters depth, causing the pressure hull to crack and allowing seawater to flood in. Only 8 men managed to escape the sinking vessel. The remaining 40 perished in the icy depths, drowned in the collapsing submarine. Adding to the grim toll, U-531, a newly commissioned boat on her maiden patrol, was detected on the 6th of May by a Royal Air Force Liberator aircraft equipped unquestionably. The tide of naval warfare had shifted dramatically, transforming what was once a covert tactic into an almost impossible endeavor. The methodical and devastating attack, executed with precise coordination, resulted in the complete annihilation of targeted vessels, leaving no survivors in their wake. The list of sunken ships grew longer with each passing day. U-194, U-125, U-438, U-657, U-273, each one a testament to the relentless pursuit of victory. Many of these submarines fell prey to aircraft equipped with advanced detection gear, while others succumbed to surface escorts that hunted them with unerring accuracy. Countless others were relentlessly pursued through a deadly ballet of air and sea forces working in perfect, synchronized harmony. Yet, nearly all of these submarines had been first identified by radar or sonar, technological tools that had decisively tipped the balance of power away from the stealthy undersea hunters. The once dominant advantage of the German U-boat fleet had been eroded so profoundly that their crews now found it almost impossible to operate undetected. For the sailors aboard these submarines, particularly those still at sea during the harrowing days of what came to be known as Black May, the psychological toll was absolutely devastating. Radio messages carried heartbreaking news of vessels that failed to return, friends, comrades, and classmates who had vanished beneath the merciless waves. The vast ocean, which had previously served as a hunting ground and strategic advantage, had become a lethal killing zone, a place where humans became prey, hunted relentlessly by an invisible yet ever-present enemy. The persistent sound of the sonar pings, those relentless pulses that exposed their hiding spots, became a constant reminder of their vulnerability and the relentless reach of their adversaries. Sonar, with its unyielding signals, had no mercy. It stripped away what little cover they might have sought. The submarines had nowhere left to hide from the relentless probing. In a desperate effort to maintain some semblance of operational effectiveness, the German command resorted to a strategy of denial, issuing orders that insisted losses were mere setbacks, temporary hurdles that could be overcome. New tactics and orders from Berlin poured down to the crews at sea, urging them to persevere with unwavering resolve, promising that the tide of battle would eventually turn in their favor. Yet the men serving aboard these submarines knew better. They had endured the unyielding pursuit of active sonar, called Azdic, tracking them with unrelenting precision. They had survived depth charge attacks that appeared to target their exact location, explosions that cracked hulls and sent shudders through their vessels. They had watched friends and fellow sailors perish beneath the onslaught of carefully placed detonations that shattered the steel walls of their boats. No propaganda, no matter how convincing, could erase or diminish these harrowing experiences. Oberleutnant Wehrer, by then commanding his own vessel, U-415, bore witness to this brutal new reality firsthand. In his memoirs, he vividly described a patrol he conducted in April of 1943, a time when survival seemed increasingly unlikely. He recounted, "We were detected within hours of reaching our designated operational area. For 3 consecutive days, enemy escorts hunted us with relentless fervor. Their sonar systems never lost contact. Despite diving to the maximum depth of 300 meters, the point at which the hull groaned and rivets began to pop, the relentless sonar kept tracking them. When they attempted to escape on the surface under the cover of night, they were met with the glare of searchlights and the presence of attacking aircraft, leaving no sanctuary within reach. Their vessel had become a target in a lethal shooting gallery, with every maneuver under threat of discovery and destruction." Wehrer's patrol aboard the U-415 would prove to be among his shortest and most harrowing missions. The submarine departed from Les Pellies on April 10 of 1944, assigned to patrol the treacherous waters approaching the western entrance to the English Channel. Wehrer understood all too well that this mission was nearly suicidal. Allied air and sea patrols had transformed the crossing of the Bay of Biscay into a nightmare. Submarines could no longer surface safely, even under cover of night. The introduction of the snorkel, a small breathing tube that enabled diesel engines to operate while submerged, had offered some hope, but Allied radar systems could detect even this minuscule protrusion above the water's surface. U-415 managed to cross the Bay of Biscay by staying submerged for 18 hours straight, a remarkable feat of endurance and stealth. Once they finally reached the open waters of the Atlantic, on the 15th of April, Wehrer surfaced briefly to recharge the submarine's batteries, a necessary move in the face of relentless pursuit. Barely 20 minutes later, a Royal Air Force Liberator bomber appeared on the horizon, its presence confirming that the enemy had already detected their radar emissions. Wehrer's lookouts had no chance to spot the aircraft first. The plane was detected beforehand. With little choice, the crew executed and 5 submarines remained submerged, quietly running on electric motors as they moved stealthily away from the patrol zone at a measured speed of 3 knots. Commander Veerer was well aware that Allied hunter-killer groups coordinated their efforts meticulously, making their searches highly effective and deadly. The moment an aircraft detected a submarine, surface escorts would swiftly be dispatched to converge on the vicinity, intensifying the threat. And indeed, on the 18th of April, the unmistakable, rhythmic echoes of Azdic pings began reverberating through the hull of Veerer's vessel, signaling that they had been located. The sound waves indicated that an escort ship had picked up their trail. Realizing the severity of the situation, Veerer ordered the submarine to descend further into the depths, pushing it down to 250 meters, and commanded the crew to switch to silent running mode, minimizing noise to evade detection. Despite this, the persistent pinging continued unabated. Above them, the escort maintained a solid contact, tracking the submarine relentlessly, hour after hour. Veerer activated every evasive maneuver he could recall, altering course by 90 degrees in hopes of throwing off the pursuer. Yet, the pinging persisted relentlessly, unwavering in its intensity. In a brief burst of speed, Veerer hoped to shake the escort's sonar, then slowed down again, aiming to confuse its operators. Unfortunately, the pinging grew louder, indicating that the escort was closing in, a sign that their chances of escape were rapidly diminishing. In a last-ditch effort to evade, Veerer released a decoy pill and a bubble decoy, designed to mimic the submarine's acoustic signature and mislead the sonar operators. Despite this, the pinging remained steady and clear. The experienced Allied sonar operators could distinguish genuine submarine echoes from decoys with practiced ease, and their confidence grew. Hours passed in this tense cat-and-mouse game, which ultimately ended with the first signs of depth charges falling nearby. The explosions struck like clockwork, all precisely at the depth of 250 meters, the exact depth at which U-415 was traveling. Veerer responded by pushing the submarine even deeper, to 300 meters, hoping to escape the lethal attack. The pressure was immense. Paint peeled from the bulkheads, and the hull strained under the immense stress, groaning loudly in protest. The crew stood rigid at their stations, faces pallid with fear, knowing they were in a deadly trap. The relentless attack continued through the night and into the following day, their exhausted bodies and minds barely holding together amid the chaos. The submarine's batteries were nearing depletion, their power reserves almost exhausted, and the air quality within the vessel was dangerously poor, making the conditions almost unbearable. Veerer faced an impossible dilemma: to surface and engage in a desperate fight, likely to be destroyed by the escort's guns, or to remain submerged until the batteries ran out, risking forced surfacing and surrender, or to try to outlast the hunter, in the hope that the escort would eventually run low on fuel or exhaust its supply of depth charges. After a moment of grim deliberation, Veerer decided to wait it out, holding position deep beneath the surface. For 16 hours, U-415 crept through the dark, silent depths while death circled overhead relentlessly. Finally, the relentless pinging ceased. The escort had exhausted its arsenal of depth charges and moved away. Veerer waited a further 4 hours, breath held in tense anticipation, before surfacing to a vast, empty ocean stretched out before him. The mission was effectively over, an aborted attempt with little hope of success. The crew, battered and traumatized by the ordeal, faced the hard reality of their defeat. U-415 never undertook another wartime patrol. Her fate was sealed in July of 1944 when she was sunk in her bunker at Toulon during an Allied air attack. Veerer survived only because he was ashore at the time, safe from the bombs that destroyed his vessel. The technological disparity between Allied and German anti-submarine warfare grew increasingly pronounced during this period. By the middle of 1943, Allied escort vessels had been outfitted with not only advanced sonar systems but also comprehensive anti-submarine warfare technology. High-frequency direction-finding equipment, known to operators as Huffduff, could triangulate and pinpoint submarine radio transmissions with remarkable accuracy. Radar systems could detect surfaced submarines at night or in fog, dramatically reducing the chances of unnoticed underwater movement. Aircraft carrying sonobuoys could create extensive underwater listening networks, covering vast areas of ocean and monitoring the presence of submarines beneath the surface. Meanwhile, forward-throwing weapons systems like the Hedgehog and Squid projected patterns of depth charges ahead of the convoy, all while maintaining sonar contact. This approach eliminated the previously dangerous dead zone, an area directly in front of the attacking vessel where submarines could previously escape undetected. The integration of these advanced systems resulted in a comprehensive, layered detection network that was greater than the sum of its individual parts. By during the height of the conflict, naval strategy relied heavily on an intricate network of air cover and specialized maritime equipment to safeguard convoys crossing treacherous waters. Escort carriers, ships specialized in providing air support, played a crucial role alongside long-range aircraft, including formidable Liberators, which operated from bases in Newfoundland and Northern Ireland, effectively closing what had once been known as the Mid-Atlantic Gap, a vast stretch of ocean that was previously beyond the reach of anti-submarine aircraft. This rigorous coverage meant that every single square mile of the oceanic route was under constant surveillance, aided by multiple overlapping sensor systems designed to detect even the most elusive submarines. When a submarine, referred to colloquially as a U-boat, approached such a convoy, detection was practically assured. If the submarine attempted to communicate with its fleet by transmitting radio signals, an essential part of coordinated underwater operations, these signals could be intercepted and triangulated by a technique known as Huffduff, allowing Allied forces to pinpoint its location with remarkable accuracy. Once detected, escort ships would race against time to the target area to intercept the threat. Alternatively, if the submarine surfaced during nighttime to shadow the convoy visually, radar systems aboard escort vessels would detect its silhouette, prompting swift airstrikes from patrol aircraft. Should the submarine choose a stealthier approach by submerging to avoid detection, sonar systems like Azdic would be employed to track its position underwater. The submarine faced an impossible triad of choices, each with dire consequences. It could stand off at a distance, unable to launch an attack, close in on the surface, risking immediate destruction by aircraft, or infiltrate beneath the waves, where it faced the danger of destruction by escort ships equipped with advanced weaponry. This strategic dilemma underscored the peril of submarine warfare during this period. One of the most significant innovations in anti-submarine tactics was the deployment of the Hedgehog weapon system. Prior to its introduction, depth charge attacks involved escorts passing over a submarine's position and dropping large charges behind or to the stern, often losing contact with the submarine in the chaos of the attack. By contrast, Hedgehog revolutionized the engagement process. It fired a pattern of 24 small, high-explosive bombs in an elliptical formation ahead of the attacking vessel, maintaining continuous sonar contact, specifically Azdic, throughout the attack. Each of these small bombs contained approximately 35 pounds of Torpex explosive, which was set to detonate upon contact with a hard surface, such as a submarine's hull. If all 24 bombs missed their target, they would sink harmlessly to the seafloor without exploding, allowing the escort to immediately prepare and fire another pattern. However, if even one bomb made contact, the resulting explosion could set off neighboring bombs, unleashing a devastating blast capable of cracking a submarine's pressure hull. This immediate feedback mechanism made Hedgehog a terrifying weapon for German U-boat commanders, who learned to dread its lethal efficiency. Unlike traditional depth charges that exploded whether or not they hit anything, Hedgehog's design provided instant confirmation. Silence indicated a miss, while explosions signified a hit. Since hits were usually catastrophic, this system drastically increased the likelihood of sinking an enemy vessel, with the psychological impact on U-boat crews being profound. Building upon the success of Hedgehog, the Allies introduced the Squid system in late 1943, an even more lethal method of underwater attack. Instead of a single pattern of small bombs, Squid employed 3 large mortars that fired patterns of 3 depth charges each, positioned approximately 250 yards ahead of the attacking ship. Unlike Hedgehog, the charges in the Squid system were set to explode at precisely calculated depths, which were determined automatically by a computer processing sonar data from Azdic. This system intelligently accounted for evasive maneuvers performed by the submarine, predicting its future position based on its current speed and trajectory, thus increasing the likelihood of a successful hit. The effectiveness of the Squid system was evident. Frigates equipped with it achieved a kill rate of about 25% per attack, a stark contrast to the less than 5% success rate typical of traditional depth charge tactics. German countermeasures proved to be woefully inadequate against these advanced systems. One such countermeasure, called the Pillenwerfer, a device designed to create streams of bubbles to deceive sonar, only fooled less experienced operators, as veteran sonar operators quickly learned to distinguish the chaotic echo signatures caused by bubbles from the solid return of a steel submarine hull. After a few seconds of analysis, seasoned technicians could ignore Pillenwerfer's decoys altogether, rendering them ineffective against well-trained crews. This evolution in anti-submarine warfare underscored the relentless technological and tactical arms race that defined the naval battles of the era. As both sides continued to develop more sophisticated tools and strategies, the ocean became an even more dangerous battleground for submariners and surface ships alike, shaping the course of naval engagements during the ongoing conflict. The military's efforts to deceive enemy sonar systems took many forms, one of which involved deploying a remarkably sophisticated decoy. This device consisted of a 1-meter-long balloon, coated with sheets of aluminum designed to reflect radar signals convincingly. Filled with calcium hydride, the balloon was released from deep underwater depths, where it slowly ascended toward shallower waters. As it approached shallower regions, seawater would react chemically with the calcium hydride, producing hydrogen gas. This reaction caused the balloon to maintain a neutral buoyancy, allowing it to hover in a position that mimicked the sonar signature of a submarine's snorkel, a common target for detection. From the perspective of radar and sonar systems, this floating decoy appeared convincingly like a submarine snorkel, thereby drawing the attention and resources of enemy detection crews. To the sonar operators on the opposing side, the decoy generated echoes that seemed genuine, but it came with notable limitations. These decoys could only be deployed from stationary submarines, which meant they couldn't be used effectively during evasive maneuvers when a submarine needed to quickly change position. Moreover, since they only rose vertically, they lacked the capability to move horizontally, making them easier to identify over time. Operators who maintained contact with such a target for more than a few minutes would likely realize it was not a real submarine, as its movement and behavior did not match operational submarines in motion. Extensive research was undertaken to develop hull coatings capable of reducing sonar reflections, in hopes of making actual submarines less detectable. The goal was to create an absorbent layer that could dampen the sonar signals rather than bounce them back, thereby blurring the submarine's signature. The Germans even named such a coating Alberic, after the dwarf from Wagner's opera, renowned for his cloak of invisibility, an allusion to the coating's intended purpose, making submarines less visible. Laboratory experiments with rubber-based coatings infused with tiny air bubbles showed promising results, suggesting that incoming sonar pulses would be absorbed rather than reflected. However, translating this success into practical, real-world applications proved to be profoundly challenging. The core problem lay in the thickness of the coating. To effectively absorb sonar signals, the layer needed to be several centimeters thick, which added a staggering amount of weight to the submarine's hull. This excess weight compromised the vessel's performance and maneuverability, and the coating itself proved highly susceptible to degradation in seawater, rapidly losing its effectiveness over time. More critically, the coatings could not withstand the immense pressure changes encountered during deep dives. As a submarine descended to great depths, the coating would compress and lose its sound-absorbing properties. Upon surfacing, it would expand irregularly, resulting in gaps and tears that rendered it useless. After months of rigorous testing on captured enemy submarines, particularly the U-boat known as U-boat, the Allied naval scientists concluded that the Alberic coating was fundamentally ineffective for operational use. Simultaneously, German engineers, working under even tighter resource constraints, faced the same disheartening realities. They recognized that their decades-long focus on anti-submarine defenses, such as the development of advanced detection systems like U-boat, had been outpaced by Allied innovations. For 20 years, Germany had concentrated on perfecting technologies that made submarines harder to detect, but had paid little attention to countermeasures against detection. As a result, when Allied systems matured and proved highly effective, Germany was unprepared with any effective response. A misjudgment lay at the heart of the German approach. They had operated under the assumption that future naval conflicts would resemble the past, preparing strategies suited to conventional warfare scenarios. Instead, the Allies had pioneered a revolutionary form of naval warfare, one driven by technological advancements that reshaped the battlefield entirely. Their focus on new detection and countermeasure systems created a stark mismatch with German tactics, which remained rooted in outdated paradigms. Consequently, the human toll of this strategic miscalculation rose rapidly and horrifyingly. By September of 1942, approximately 3,000 men served aboard U-boat and other submarine vessels, conducting patrols and missions across the seas. Less than 2 years later, by August of 1944, this number had dwindled drastically. Out of the 40,000 sailors who had initially been part of the submarine force, nearly 28,000 had been killed in action or lost at sea, an overwhelming loss by any measure. The survival rate for submarine crews plummeted below 30%, transforming every patrol into a near-certain death sentence. Despite this grim reality, the German Navy persisted in deploying submarines into combat zones, even as inexperienced crews replaced the seasoned commanders who had achieved early wartime successes. One such officer, Feldwebel Hirschfeld, who transferred early in 1944 to a larger Type 9D submarine designated U-234, vividly documented the psychological toll the relentless attrition exacted on the crews. He described how the new recruits, aware of the staggering casualty figures, entered their first patrol. We find ourselves navigating the perilous waters aboard vessels that resemble iron coffins. Submarines designed for stealth and resilience, yet inherently vulnerable in their very nature. A glimmer of hope appeared in mid-1944 with the introduction of snorkel technology, a device that extended one's breathing capability beneath the surface. This extendable tube, which protruded above the waterline, was a game-changer. It permitted diesel engines to run while the submarine remained submerged, alleviating the need to surface completely and thus reducing exposure to enemy detection. Theoretically, this innovation meant that submarines could remain underwater for entire patrol durations, increasing their operational endurance and safety. However, this promising tool was quickly met with the formidable advances of Allied radar technology. Despite the small profile of the snorkel head above the water, Allied radar operators swiftly learned to detect its presence, rendering the stealth advantage somewhat diminished. Whether submerged with the snorkel extended or running silently on batteries, the submarines remained vulnerable. Sonar, becoming progressively more sophisticated, could identify the faint acoustic signatures of diesel engines or the subtle disturbance of water caused by the snorkel's movement. The design of the snorkel itself was originally Dutch, a piece of technology captured after Germany occupied the Netherlands in 1940. The initial Dutch version was straightforward: a simple tube that extended above the water's surface, providing air for the diesel engines while the vessel cruised at periscope depth. German engineers improved this concept significantly, integrating automatic valves that would seal the tube during rough seas or waves washing over it, preventing water ingress. They also developed exhaust systems that vented diesel fumes underwater, effectively eliminating the telltale smoke plumes that had previously betrayed a submarine's position when surfaced. Still, operating the snorkel proved to be an excruciating ordeal for the crew. Precise control over depth was essential. The snorkel head had to hover just above the waterline. Too deep, and the automatic valve would seal shut, causing the diesel engines to suffocate from lack of air, leading to rapid internal pressure drops that inflicted agonizing ear pain. Too shallow, and the conning tower would break the surface, exposing the vessel to aerial strikes and surface radar detection. The tumult of rough seas made maintaining this delicate balance nearly impossible, as waves constantly washed over the snorkel head, triggering the automatic valves to open and close repeatedly. Every cycle of opening and closing generated violent pressure fluctuations within the submarine's interior, creating a deafening cacophony. The noise from the running diesel engines at full throttle, combined with the pressure shifts, made normal communication impossible. Men shouted over the tumult, desperately trying to coordinate their efforts amid the chaos. The vibrations from the engines and the water's impact rattled every fitting inside the boat, destroying any chance of restful sleep. Despite German engineering efforts to contain exhaust fumes, leaks persisted, filling the interior with headaches, nausea, and discomfort for the crew. After enduring 12 hours of snorkeling, an exhausting ordeal of near-constant noise, discomfort, and danger, submarine crews inevitably emerged from the ordeal exhausted, physically ill, and deafened by the relentless racket. Furthermore, the hoped-for invisibility was illusory. Allied radar operators soon learned to detect snorkel heads with increasing reliability, especially in calm seas where the small radar cross-section of the tube could be distinguished more easily. Aircraft equipped with sophisticated radar systems could pick up returns from the snorkel, particularly in still water conditions, making the submarines vulnerable to air attack. Once detected, Submarines faced relentless attack from aircraft armed with depth charges or homing torpedoes. These aircraft would force the vessel to dive deeper, thereby interrupting the battery charging cycle and rendering the boat less effective. Some submarines were caught while snorkeling, detected either through their acoustic signatures, such as the noise from running diesel engines, or by the wake produced as the snorkel tube cut through the water's surface. Allied operators had become highly skilled at distinguishing actual submarine contacts from false echoes, thanks to training programs that produced thousands of proficient sonar operators capable of analyzing acoustic signals with remarkable precision. In summary, while the snorkel was a technological step forward, offering submarines a temporary reprieve from the dangers of surfacing, it came with significant drawbacks. The physical toll on the crew was immense, the stealth benefits were diminishing, and the ever-advancing Allied detection methods rendered the device less effective with each passing month. The combination of mechanical limitations, environmental challenges, and increasingly effective Allied countermeasures meant that the snorkel, despite its ingenuity, could not fully alter the brutal reality faced by submariners in wartime. By the middle of the 20th century, maritime warfare had entered a new era, driven by technological advancements and rigorous training that transformed underwater detection and combat from art into precise science. Crews of Allied navies, particularly the British and Americans, had developed a sophisticated understanding of sonar, or as it was then known, Azdic, which enabled them to not only detect submarines more reliably but also to analyze their behavior with remarkable accuracy. This combination of cutting-edge equipment and highly trained operators created an extensive, almost impenetrable detection network that German U-boats found exceedingly difficult to evade. The process of mastering sonar detection was rigorous and methodical. Training facilities across the Allied nations standardized Azdic instruction, ensuring consistency and excellence in skill development. New operators endured weeks of intensive classroom education, where they delved into the intricacies of acoustic theory, how sound propagates through water, how variations in temperature and salinity influence sonar beams, and how submarine hulls reflect sound waves, often in subtle and complex ways. They meticulously studied recordings of actual submarine echoes, gaining the ability to distinguish them from naturally occurring sounds in the ocean, such as whale calls, wrecks resting on the seabed, schools of fish, or thermal layers that could distort or mask signals. This deep understanding was crucial because voice identification and pattern recognition became essential skills in combat, and they practiced these skills relentlessly on simulators designed to recreate realistic hunting scenarios. By the year 1944, the Allied navies had produced a new generation of Azdic operators whose expertise surpassed that of the early war pioneers. These pioneers had initially developed tactics through trial and error, often relying on instinct and experience, but the newer operators brought a professional pride and scientific precision that significantly enhanced operational effectiveness. The best operators competed fiercely in a professional environment that rewarded speed and accuracy. They aimed to detect submarines in the shortest possible time, to maintain contact over the longest periods, and to achieve the highest success rates in attack. Publication of monthly performance tables by the Royal Navy fostered a competitive spirit, encouraging teams to improve continually. Exceptional operators earned promotions and decorations, and their skills became legendary among their peers. Tales spread of those who could identify specific types of submarines by subtle variations in echo signatures, or who could follow evasive maneuvers by interpreting complex acoustic signals as they traversed the different temperature and salinity layers of the water column, never losing contact once it was established. This scientific mastery of acoustic detection contributed decisively to the Allied victory in the Battle of the Atlantic, which by June 6, 1944, had been effectively won. On that pivotal day, the Normandy landings proceeded without a single loss to German submarines, despite their desperate efforts to disrupt the cross-channel traffic. The sonar screens maintained by Allied escort vessels were so capable that any submarine attempting to approach the invasion fleet was detected immediately. These vessels, equipped with extensive sonar coverage and anti-submarine weapons, drove off or destroyed enemy vessels long before they could launch torpedoes. Although U-boats, or German U-boats, would sink some ships in the days following the initial landings, the primary invasion fleet was able to cross the channel largely unperturbed. The German Naval Command, under Admiral Donitz, had ordered all available U-boats to attack the invasion fleet, deploying a total of 36 submarines along the English Channel and its approaches. This mission, however, was widely recognized as suicidal. The shallow waters of the Channel limited submarine maneuverability, and with Allied air supremacy unchallenged, hundreds of aircraft patrolling relentlessly overhead, combined with a vast number of surface escorts creating overlapping sonar fields, the Germans faced insurmountable obstacles. Despite these formidable defenses, the German command persisted, ordering the attack regardless of the enormous risks involved. German U-boats equipped with snorkels, which allowed them to operate closer to the surface while still recharging batteries, fared slightly better than those without. One such vessel, U-84, commanded by Uloit Hinde, managed to penetrate near the invasion beaches sufficiently to fire torpedoes at landing craft on June 8. This submarine survived the encounter and withdrew, but the relentless Allied acoustic and aerial surveillance meant such moments of success were rare and fleeting, as the advanced Azdic systems and air patrols constantly tracked and neutralized any threat. The effectiveness of Allied sonar detection, combined with their overwhelming air and surface superiority, made the German undersea assault a costly and largely ineffective endeavor in the context of the broader invasion effort. This concerted defiance of U-boat tactics underscored how technological mastery and disciplined training had reshaped submarine warfare, turning the tide decisively in favor of the Allies in the critical months leading up to the liberation of Western Europe. The relentless pursuit and destructive tactics of Allied anti-submarine warfare, particularly the use of depth charges and coordinated tracking methods, inflicted devastating damage upon the German U-boat fleet. Among these, the U-984 was one of the rare few submarines that managed to survive the harrowing onslaught and return to tell its story, an achievement shared by only 3 boats that successfully engaged invasion shipping and emerged from the ordeal. For most of their counterparts, the encounter was far grimmer. They were not so fortunate. An illustrative example occurred on June 9, when the U-55 was detected by an Azdic sonar system while cautiously attempting to approach the Allied invasion fleet. The frigate Halstead promptly grasped the contact and maintained a relentless, 11-hour-long tracking of the submarine. Despite the submarine's efforts to evade detection by diving to substantial depths and running silent, techniques designed to avoid sonar detection, the Type 147 Azdic system proved remarkably accurate, tracking the U-55 in 3-dimensional space. As Halstead's onboard inventory of depth charges dwindled, the frigate called for reinforcements, leading to the arrival of the destroyer Eskimo, which took over the attack. The second attack pattern against U-55 struck amidships, where it inflicted critical damage, cracking the pressure hull and causing the submarine to sink rapidly. All 48 crew members aboard were lost in this tragic final moments. On the following day, June 10, the U-821 was subjected to a grueling 14-hour chase by a group of Allied escorts. The submarine employed every evade and attack tactic at its disposal, including diving to depths of 300 meters, deploying decoys designed to mislead sonar, and changing course unpredictably. Despite these desperate measures, the Azdic contact remained unwavering, a testament to the Allies' mastery of sonar detection. As their batteries neared exhaustion and breathable air became scarce, the commanding officer, Captain Lieutenant Ulrich Nakfus, ultimately surfaced, choosing to surrender rather than continue the futile fight. Allied ships swiftly rescued 37 survivors from the water, but 12 crew members had already perished during the relentless depth-charge attacks. Such scenes of destruction and loss were, sadly, not isolated. The months that followed in June and July saw a relentless slaughter of German U-boats attempting to fulfill their mission to attack the Normandy invasion. In total, out of the 36 U-boats deployed for the Operation Overlord assault, 25 were destroyed, an alarming loss rate approaching 70% within just 2 months. The surviving vessels, battered and traumatized, limped back to French ports, their operational effectiveness severely compromised. Their failure was evident. Not a single troop transport or major warship was sunk by submarine attack during this campaign. Instead, the German submarines succeeded primarily in hitting a handful of smaller vessels like landing craft, at the tragic expense of hundreds of submariners' lives and dozens of irreplaceable submarines. The waters off Normandy became a graveyard, strewn with the wreckage of fallen U-boats. Post-war surveys by the Allies documented the extent of the destruction beneath the ocean's surface, counting at least 17 German U-boat hulls in the invasion zone, most bearing evidence of catastrophic depth-charge damage. These sunken relics served as underwater memorials, haunting remnants of a strategic effort that proved largely futile against opponents armed with superior sonar and radar systems. In the final months of the conflict, the Germans introduced the Type 21 Electro boat, a revolutionary class of submarines designed in a desperate bid to regain underwater dominance. These advanced submarines showcased streamlined hulls, significant battery capacity, and sophisticated acoustic quieting technologies. Capable of sustained submerged speeds of around 17 knots, they represented a significant leap from traditional designs. Had they been available in larger numbers earlier in the war, particularly in 1943, they might have shifted the balance of naval warfare. Unfortunately, only 2 Type 21 submarines completed combat patrols before Germany's surrender, rendering their potential impact moot. Their design marked a radical departure from earlier U-boat models, which were primarily surface vessels capable of briefly submerging. The Type 21 was optimized for underwater operation, surfacing only when absolutely necessary, with a hull shaped like a torpedo to minimize drag. This hydrodynamic form, combined with triple the battery capacity of conventional U-boats, enabled these vessels to maintain underwater speeds that could potentially outrun most surface ships and enemy escorts. The design minimized external protrusions, such as deck guns and torpedo storage, further reducing hydrodynamic drag and noise, which was intended to make detection more difficult. These technological advancements represented the final, desperate efforts by German engineers to maintain underwater superiority, yet their late appearance and limited numbers meant they could not alter the course of the war. The haunting wrecks of these submarines now lie on the ocean floor, silent witnesses to one of the most intense and tragic underwater battles of the 20th century. The Type 21 submarine represented a significant leap forward in U-boat design and capabilities, embodying technological innovations that aimed to redefine underwater warfare. Its specifications were nothing short of impressive. It could sustain a submerged speed of 17 knots for a duration of 90 minutes, allowing it to outrun many Allied anti-submarine measures of the time. Moreover, it was capable of cruising at a modest 6 knots for an astonishing 3 days without the need to surface, granting it extended operational range and increased survivability in hostile waters. Its design enabled it to dive to depths of approximately 280 meters, far below the typical depth setting of Allied depth charges, making it a formidable foe in the depths of the ocean. One of the most groundbreaking features of the Type 21 was its hydraulic torpedo reload system. Unlike traditional methods, this system allowed the submarine to fire all 6 of its bow-mounted torpedoes, then quickly reload and prepare for subsequent attacks, all within less than 20 minutes, without ever leaving combat stations. This rapid-fire capability significantly enhanced its offensive potential during engagements. German engineers also tackled the persistent challenge of sonar detection. They coated the hull with synthetic rubber tiles designed specifically to absorb active sonar pulses, termed Azdic signals, thus reducing the submarine's acoustic profile. In addition, the submarine's propellers were engineered with meticulous care to minimize cavitation noise, which is a common source of acoustic signature detection. The machinery inside was mounted on rubber isolators, serving as vibration dampers that curtailed noise transmission through the hull, further obscuring the vessel's presence. Improvements were also made to the snorkel system, featuring enhanced valves and more efficient airflow management, allowing the submarine to stay submerged longer and operate more quietly while running its diesel engines just below the surface. The development of the Type 21 was theoretically revolutionary. It promised to be significantly more elusive and harder to detect than traditional U-boats. Construction commenced in late 1943, utilizing a prefabrication approach modeled after American shipbuilding techniques. This modular manufacturing process involved constructing the submarine from 8 separate sections manufactured across different factories throughout Germany. These modules were then transported to assembly yards for final integration, enabling rapid production despite the complexities involved. By the war's end, a total of 118 Type 21 submarines had been completed, although only 4 reached the stage of combat readiness. However, the program was marred by numerous problems, primarily stemming from the hurried pace of development and the fragmented nature of its production. Quality control issues became widespread. Sections produced in different factories often failed to align precisely during assembly. These misalignments led to cracked welds under pressure, electrical systems that frequently malfunctioned, and hydraulic torpedo reloading mechanisms prone to leaks. Most critically, the innovative rubber coating designed to mask the submarine's sonar signature proved unreliable. It deteriorated rapidly in seawater, peeled off during deep dives, and in some cases, actually increased the vessel's acoustic emissions rather than diminishing them, undermining the entire purpose of the stealth feature. The only true combat patrol conducted by a Type 21 submarine was undertaken by U-2511, commanded by the corvette and Captain Adalbert Schnee. This vessel departed from Bergen, Norway, on April 30 of 1945, just days before Germany's surrender, marking the final act of its operational history. Schnee's orders were to showcase the new submarine's capabilities by penetrating Allied patrol lines and reaching the North Atlantic. For a span of 2 weeks, U-2511 operated off the coast of the British Isles, deftly evading numerous Allied anti-submarine efforts. During this patrol, Schnee identified several potential targets but refrained from opening fire, adhering strictly to orders to avoid engagement unless circumstances favored a decisive attack. The patrol served as both a demonstration of the Type 21's advanced features and a sober reminder of its limitations. The submarine's remarkable underwater speed and endurance allowed it to outrun escorts when detected, effectively escaping pursuit. Nevertheless, it remained vulnerable to acoustic detection through Allied sonar operators who quickly adapted to the submarine's acoustic profile. On multiple occasions, escort ships pinpointed the U-2511 with solid contacts, initiating full-scale hunting operations. In each instance, only the submarine's superior speed underwater enabled it to escape before being caught. Following Germany's capitulation, Captain Schnee filed a patrol report that acknowledged the significant improvements offered by the Type 21. While it represented a substantial advancement over earlier U-boat designs, particularly in its stealth, speed, and reloading capabilities, the report also highlighted its shortcomings. The vessel's vulnerabilities, stemming from production flaws and unreliable systems, ultimately limited its overall impact on the naval conflict of the Second World War. The submarine's presence was no longer unnoticed, at least not by the Allied sonar systems. As time progressed, it was inevitable that the Allies would develop more sophisticated tactics and advanced technological tools capable of detecting and countering this once feared vessel. The U-30,008, the only other Type 21 submarine to venture out on a combat patrol, had an even less distinguished record, reflecting its limited operational success and the many challenges it faced. On the 1st of May, in the final weeks of the war in Europe, the submarine set sail from the naval base at Kiel, with a mission to evacuate stranded German personnel from Norway. The vessel's journey concluded peacefully on the 9th of May, when it surrendered to Allied forces without engaging in any combat or firing a single shot. This act marked the end of its brief and largely unsuccessful career in wartime service, as the war in Europe was drawing to a close. After the conflict, naval experts from Britain and the United States conducted thorough examinations of the submarine. Their findings revealed significant flaws rooted in the poor quality control that had plagued the entire Type 21 program. The rubber coatings designed to make the vessel stealthier were peeling away in multiple areas, exposing its metal surface. Hydraulic systems, vital for maneuvering and control, exhibited leaks that compromised operational reliability. Corrosion had set into electrical connections, further impairing the vessel's systems. Although the submarine was technically capable of performing its duties, it was far from the revolutionary weapon that German propaganda had claimed it to be. For the surviving German submarine crews who had endured the war, the haunting memory of sonar detection remained a source of dread. In countless post-war interviews and memoirs, veterans repeatedly returned to the sound of Azdic pings striking their hulls. The sharp, metallic ringing, growing louder and faster as escort ships closed in, signaled a grim transformation. They were no longer the hunters but the hunted. This relentless auditory assault signaled the end of the myth of submarine invincibility and marked the beginning of systematic, often deadly, efforts to destroy them. Herbert Wehrer, one of only 3 commanders of the U-boat class whose vessels survived the war and remained operational, eventually emigrated to the United States in 1957, where he became an American citizen. Many years later, in 1969, he published a memoir titled Iron Coffins. The book's dedication read, "To my fallen comrades who rest in iron coffins at the bottom of the sea." In this deeply personal account, Wehrer acknowledged a painful truth that had taken him years to accept. Germany's defeat was not primarily due to a lack of courage or numerical superiority, though these factors played a role, but rather because of technological advancements that the Germans failed to understand or counter. The Allies had learned how to see through the water, effectively piercing the underwater veil that had once protected German submarines. The Germans, on the other hand, never managed to develop effective means of concealment. Wörer's journey from a defeated enemy officer to an American citizen reflected a transformation that echoed his wartime experience, marked by adversity, adaptation, and eventual integration into a new homeland. Following Germany's surrender, Wörer spent 2 years in British prisoner of war camps, where he served as an interpreter and liaison between the Allied authorities and remaining German naval personnel. His fluency in English and cooperative attitude helped secure his early release in 1947. Briefly returning to Germany, he found the nation physically devastated, its cities in ruins and its naval bases reduced to rubble. The submarine service he once knew was gone. The bases were filled with scuttled and abandoned submarines, and most of his comrades had perished or disappeared. In 1952, seeking new opportunities, Wörer immigrated to the United States on a technical visa, sponsored by a marine engineering firm that valued his extensive submarine expertise. He established himself in Connecticut, working as a consultant specializing in sonar technology and underwater acoustics. He was well aware of the irony. He was now contributing to the very technology that had led to the downfall of Germany's U-boat fleet. By 1957, Wörer had taken the oath of American citizenship, pledging allegiance to the nation whose sonar had hunted him through the depths of the Atlantic and beyond. The publication of Iron Coffins became his way of processing the trauma of war and paying tribute to those who had fallen. For Herbert Wörer, it was a profound act of remembrance, reflecting both the pain of loss and the acceptance of the technological realities that had changed the face of naval warfare forever. During his extensive research, Wörer delved into countless sources, interviewing survivors, analyzing war diaries, and scrutinizing patrol reports. By the time his memoir was published when he was just 49 years old, it had already gained significant attention, rapidly climbing the bestseller lists. His detailed account of submarine warfare, narrated from the perspective of the enemy, captivated American readers who sought an authentic view of the clandestine battle beneath the oceans. Simultaneously, German readers, especially veterans of the Kriegsmarine, appreciated the honesty and rawness of Wörer's testimony, recognizing it as a sincere reflection of their wartime experiences. Unlike many German war narratives that often romanticized heroism or attempted to justify the actions taken during Nazi rule, Wörer's memoir did not shy away from confronting the brutal reality of the final years of the U-boat campaign. He openly acknowledged the overwhelming sense of futility, describing the relentless horror faced by submariners as the tides turned against them. His work stood out as a candid, unvarnished account that emphasized the grim toll of the conflict, offering a perspective that was both humanized and painfully honest. However, the book's reception was not unanimously positive. Among German veterans, some critics believed that Wörer had exaggerated the technological superiority of the Allied forces in his narrative, using this as a way to rationalize Germany's eventual defeat. A few American reviewers also raised eyebrows, suggesting that Wörer might have overblown his personal achievements and, at times, minimized the extent of German war crimes committed during the conflict. Despite these debates, the core of Wörer's story, that German submariners continually encountered Allied sonar technology so advanced that it rendered their stealth nearly impossible, was largely accepted by naval historians as factually accurate. While specific details and statistics were questioned, the overarching narrative underscored the technological disparity that played a critical role in Germany's naval downfall. In the years following his publication, Wörer continued to serve as a marine consultant, contributing his expertise until his retirement in 1985. He occasionally shared his experiences through lectures at institutions such as the Naval War College and the Submarine School, offering valuable insights to American naval officers eager to understand the intricacies of submarine warfare from the German perspective. Moreover, Wehrer participated in numerous historical conferences and appeared in documentaries dedicated to the Battle of the Atlantic. In his later years, he became an outspoken advocate for reconciliation between Germany and the United States, engaging with veteran organizations and educational institutions to promote messages about the tragic futility of war and the paramount importance of international cooperation. The statistical realities of the U-boat campaign paint a somber picture. Out of approximately 1,160 U-boats commissioned during the Second World War, about 785 were lost, nearly two-thirds. The human toll was staggering. Nearly 30,000 submariners perished in the conflict, translating to a casualty rate of 75%. This was the highest percentage of loss among all military branches involved in the war. Most of these devastations occurred after May of 1943, once Allied sonar systems had reached a level of maturity that rendered U-boat stealth nearly obsolete. In the final 18 months of the war, deploying a U-boat on patrol had become essentially a death sentence for its crew. Among those who survived was Wolfgang Hirschfeld, the radio operator who had served aboard U-109 during the early years of the campaign and survived the entire ordeal, ending the war aboard U-234, which surrendered in May 1945. In his diary's closing entry, Hirschfeld reflected poignantly on his experiences. "We who sailed beneath the waves believed ourselves to be invisible warriors. We thought our stealth was unbreakable, but the enemy taught us that invisibility was nothing but an illusion. Their sonar always found us, stripping away our sanctuary and leaving us exposed." His survival was, in itself, a remarkable feat amidst such extensive loss. U-234 departed from Kiel in April of 1945 on what would be its final patrol, carrying a secret cargo destined for Japan. Loaded with advanced weapons, blueprints, technical documents, samples of uranium oxide, and 2 Japanese naval officers, the U-boat's mission was to exchange German technological secrets for Japanese raw materials, particularly rubber and rare metals needed for their war efforts. However, before the submarine could reach its destination, Germany unconditionally surrendered, rendering the mission moot. Captain Lieutenant Jan Heinrich Feller, commanding U-234, faced an agonizing choice: surrender to the Americans, continue onward to Japan, or scuttle the vessel to prevent its capture. Ultimately, Feller chose to surrender the submarine, but the circumstances were complex and fraught with difficult decisions. Before the Allied forces destroyed the remaining uranium samples and the classified documents, a remarkable event unfolded in the waters off the coast of New Hampshire. On the 19th of May in the year 1945, a U-234 submarine unexpectedly surfaced, revealing itself to the United States Navy. This surfaced vessel then transmitted a surrender signal, indicating its intention to cease hostilities and surrender to American forces. Following this dramatic surrender, the destroyer USS Sutton took charge of escorting the German submarine to the naval base at Portsmouth. The crew aboard the U-234, including a notable officer named Hirschfeld, was taken into custody and became prisoners of war. Despite the circumstances, the American authorities who detained them extended a level of courtesy that was quite surprising, given the wartime context. These officers, especially Hirschfeld, were fascinated by the large Type 10D cargo submarine they had captured, along with its unusually large and diverse cargo. Hirschfeld himself spent a total of 8 months in a POW camp located in Maryland, during which he experienced a period of relative humane treatment that stood in stark contrast to the brutal conditions often reported in Soviet prisons. In Soviet captivity, many German prisoners faced harsh treatment, with numerous cases of starvation, forced labor, and high mortality rates among prisoners of war. By comparison, American detention facilities provided adequate supplies of food, proper medical care, and generally humane conditions that aimed to respect the dignity of the captured personnel. During this time, Hirschfeld worked as an electrician, repairing radios and other electronic equipment. He also took on the role of a language instructor, teaching German to American intelligence officers who were preparing for upcoming occupation duties in Germany. His time as a prisoner concluded in January of 1946 when he was repatriated back to his homeland. Upon returning to Hamburg, Hirschfeld encountered a shattered city. His family's home had been destroyed in the relentless bombing campaigns carried out by the Allies. His father had succumbed during a raid, while his mother and sister had survived but were now residing in a refugee camp, displaced by the widespread destruction and upheaval that had ravaged Germany. The country itself was in ruins, divided, occupied, and deeply scarred by the war. Hirschfeld, like many others, had to adapt to a new reality. He found work in various fields, including electrical work, ship repair, and serving as a translator for the British occupation forces. During the 1950s, he turned his experiences into writing, beginning with a memoir based on a secret diary he had kept throughout the war. This memoir was published in Germany in the year 1972 and offered a candid, unsentimental perspective on the life aboard a U-boat from the viewpoint of a crew member rather than that of a commanding officer. Hirschfeld's diary entries from the years 1942 and 1943 charted the harrowing evolution of morale on the submarine. Initial confidence giving way to growing terror as Allied sonar technology advanced. Early journal entries described successful attacks, narrow escapes, and the camaraderie that sustained the crew through perilous missions. As the war progressed, however, his recordings detailed mounting losses, failed attacks, and the psychological deterioration of men increasingly aware that they were being hunted by a technologically superior enemy. The final entries, penned in 1945, revealed a tone not of defiance but of resignation. In these last notes, Hirschfeld acknowledged the inevitable. We knew the war was lost. We knew most of us would die. But we kept going because that was what warriors did, even when the cause was hopeless and unjust. His writings underscored a stark technological lesson, the fundamental transformation of submarine warfare. During the war years, the advent of active sonar meant that the oceans could no longer conceal submerged vessels as effectively as before. The once stealthy underwater world had been drastically exposed by new detection systems, forcing navies worldwide to reconsider their strategies. The lessons learned during the Battle of the Atlantic in those dark years of the war shaped the future of submarine technology profoundly. Post-war naval development focused heavily on reducing the acoustic signatures of submarines to evade sonar detection. Hull designs were altered to prioritize stealth, incorporating specialized coatings that absorbed sonar pulses, innovations that became standard features. Propeller designs were refined to minimize cavitation noise, further reducing the likelihood of detection. This relentless pursuit of stealth became the core principle guiding submarine engineering, establishing an enduring foundation for modern underwater warfare. Today's submarine strategies and technologies owe a significant debt to the lessons gleaned from the Atlantic campaigns between 1939 and 1945. Every navy around the world invested heavily in quieting technologies aimed at minimizing sonar signatures. The focus on acoustic stealth spurred advancements not only in hull design but also in coatings that could absorb and dissipate sonar waves. Mechanical innovations, including quieter propeller designs and vibration damping systems, became vital components of modern submarines. Collectively, these efforts transformed submarine warfare into a high-stakes game of cat and mouse, where the ability to remain undetected could determine success. Or during World War II, all submarine systems were meticulously isolated and mounted on sound dampening supports, a deliberate effort aimed at enhancing their acoustic stealth. The overarching objective consistently remained the same: to regain the stealth that the German U-boat fleet had lost as Allied sonar technology matured and became increasingly effective. The Germans, in their relentless pursuit of underwater dominance, had invested heavily in reducing noise and electromagnetic signatures, understanding that silence was their most formidable defense against detection. In the aftermath of the war, the Soviet Union managed to capture several Type 21 submarines, along with dozens of German engineers who had been instrumental in their development. These captured vessels and experts laid the foundation for what would become the Whiskey-class submarines, which quickly came to dominate Soviet naval construction through the early Cold War years. Soviet naval architects and engineers studied every detail of the Type 21 design, paying particular attention to its advanced soundproofing and quieting features. They recognized that future underwater combat would largely hinge on the ongoing contest between submarine stealth and detection capabilities. As a result, Soviet submarines integrated rubber anechoic tiles, which absorbed and dampened sound waves. They also adopted improved propeller designs to minimize cavitation noise, and implemented machinery isolation systems that drew directly from the German technological innovations. Meanwhile, the United States Navy launched an extensive series of tests on the captured German submarines, especially the U-2513 and U-3008, both of which belonged to the Type 21 class and had been surrendered in May of the year 1945. American engineers and naval strategists were particularly impressed by the streamlined hull shapes, the large battery capacities that allowed for extended underwater endurance, and the hydraulic systems that supported efficient operation. These features significantly influenced the design of the subsequent Tang-class submarines, which stood as America's first purpose-built post-war submarine fleet. The Tang class incorporated the distinctive teardrop hull form pioneered by German designers, a design that nearly doubled underwater speed compared to the fleet boats of World War II. This marked a pivotal shift in U.S. submarine technology and tactical capability. Simultaneously, Britain's Royal Navy undertook thorough testing of the U-2511, exposing it to a series of exercises against escort groups equipped with the latest A-sized, or A-band, active sonar systems. The results of these tests were sobering and revealed the formidable challenges posed by the Type 21 submarines. Despite advances in sonar technology, detecting and maintaining contact with a fast, quiet, deep-diving submarine proved to be exceedingly difficult. The exercises highlighted that, had the Type 21 boats been deployed in significant numbers back in 1943, they would have posed a serious threat to Allied anti-submarine warfare efforts. This realization spurred British submarine development over the subsequent decade, leading to the creation of the Porpoise-class vessels, which incorporated many features pioneered by the German designs. On the technological front, sonar systems grew exponentially more sophisticated during this period. Passive sonar arrays expanded their detection ranges into the hundreds of miles, allowing submarines to be identified without emitting any signals that might reveal their position. Active sonar systems evolved into multi-frequency configurations capable of defeating most countermeasures, while advances in computer processing made automatic target classification a reality. This intense technological race, the contest between submarine stealth and detection, became one of the defining features of Cold War naval strategy, directly stemming from the lessons learned during the Battle of the Atlantic. By the 1950s, American sonar development had made revolutionary strides. The introduction of the SQS-4 sonar system in the year 1952 equipped U.S. submarines with the capability to track targets at ranges exceeding 10,000 yards. Variable depth sonar, which could be towed behind surface ships on long cables, could be lowered beneath thermal layers in the ocean, thus enabling detection of deep-diving submarines operating at greater depths. Aircraft-mounted sonar buoys, or sonobuoys, formed extensive acoustic networks and created acoustic fences across strategic choke points, effectively blocking passages and trapping enemy submarines. By the 1960s, American anti-submarine forces had achieved detection and tracking capabilities that vastly surpassed the systems of World War II, advancing by orders of magnitude in both range and reliability. In these conditions, Soviet submariners found themselves in a situation eerily similar to that of German U-boat crews during the year 1943. Just as their German predecessors had been hunted relentlessly by Allied sonar and anti-submarine tactics, Soviet crews operating modern submarines in the Cold War era faced intense hunting pressure. Despite their technological advancements and efforts to enhance stealth, they were increasingly being pursued by sophisticated American and Allied anti-submarine forces, making their underwater operations perilous and fraught with risk. During the Cold War era, advancements in sonar technology fundamentally transformed underwater warfare, revealing the once impenetrable sanctuaries that submarines had relied upon for safety. Declassified Soviet naval archives, published following the end of the Cold War, shed light on the minds of submarine commanders during the tumultuous years of the 60s and 70s. They vividly described the intense psychological toll inflicted by Western sonar systems, employing language strikingly similar to that used by German submarine veterans in earlier conflicts. These veterans vividly recounted the relentless, high-pitched pinging of active sonar, a sound that pierced the depths and shattered the illusion of stealth. The persistent noise was more than mere inconvenience. It was a stark reminder that the enemy was acutely aware of their position. This realization of being constantly tracked beneath the waves, coupled with the knowledge that invisible technological eyes watched their movements, created an environment of helplessness and mounting anxiety. The technological rivalry between East and West intensified these feelings, pushing both sides to reach new heights of innovation. Soviet engineers responded by developing increasingly quieter submarines, employing cutting-edge propeller designs, sophisticated rubber coatings to absorb sound, and revolutionary propulsion systems that minimized noise emissions. Meanwhile, American submarine technology advanced in tandem, adopting similar silent running techniques but also pioneering the development of ultra-sensitive passive sonar arrays. These sensors could detect faint sounds from great distances, giving their operators a crucial edge in the silent underwater cat-and-mouse game. The competition for underwater dominance culminated with the deployment of nuclear-powered submarines, vessels capable of remaining submerged for months on end thanks to their virtually unlimited endurance. These nuclear subs represented a pinnacle of technological achievement, transforming the strategic landscape. Still, Despite their advanced capabilities, even nuclear submarines remained vulnerable to acoustic detection, underscoring the persistent truth that no vessel was entirely invisible. The core lesson drawn from the historic Battle of the Atlantic, that sonar could strip away a submarine's concealment, remained as relevant as ever. At the heart of this reality was the human element. Submarine crews across all navies internalized the lessons painfully learned by German sailors during the Second World War. To be detected by active sonar was to be exposed to danger, an undeniable signal that the enemy had pinpointed their location, could monitor their movements, and might unleash deadly weapons at any moment. This psychological dimension of submarine warfare endured unaltered through decades of technological progress. The sound of active sonar ping, echoing off the hull, evoked primal fear in crews from America, Britain, the Soviet Union, and France alike. It was the universal signal of vulnerability, an auditory indicator that the enemy was aware of their presence, and that silence was the only refuge in a perilous underwater battlefield. The experience of the German submarine veterans from the war years served as a stark reminder that, beneath the waves, the danger was not just in the physical threat but also in the mental toll of constant awareness of being hunted. Fast forward to the year 1985, approximately 40 years after the cessation of hostilities, and a modest gathering took place in the United States, where former German submariners convened informally. Many of these veterans, some accompanied by their families, came to confront the new reality, one in which the technological prowess of their former enemies had, in many ways, turned the tide of history. Herbert Wehrer, then aged 75 and now residing comfortably in America, addressed the assembled group with deep reflection. He recounted the naivety with which they entered the war, believing in the supposed invincibility of their submarines beneath the ocean's surface. Wehrer explained that, during that time, they had been convinced that the ocean depths provided complete protection, a belief that submerging meant disappearing entirely from view. For a brief period, this optimism appeared justified. However, that illusion was shattered by the advent and deployment of Western sonar technology. Wehrer vividly described how the metallic pinging that repeatedly struck their hulls conveyed a harsh truth: the ocean no longer concealed them. Instead, it had become a zone of constant fear, a reality in which they could neither see nor fight back against an unseen enemy. They were forced into a state of passive waiting, submerged in darkness as the relentless technological hunt continued. The Germans learned a sobering lesson. They had been defeated not by brute strength alone, but by the relentless march of science and engineering, driven forward by societies free to innovate more rapidly than they could adapt. Many of those who survived the ordeal attributed their narrow escape largely to luck. They acknowledged, with a heavy sense of humility, that their submarines were outdated relics, obsolete compared to the sophisticated underwater detection systems their enemies now wielded. Their defeat was a reflection of the profound and painful truth: they were young men operating in machines that could no longer keep pace with the relentless advance of technological progress. They had been sent into the depths armed with equipment that was no longer sufficient, confronting an adversary whose capacity to innovate had outstripped their own. The small assembly listened in contempt together. Once bitter adversaries, the German and Allied naval forces found themselves united in a shared recognition of a profound transformation that, in the early years of the war, had seemed almost impossible to imagine. This change was driven by a harsh lesson etched into history in the form of 30,000 submarine graves resting silently beneath the vast stretches of the Atlantic Ocean. It became clear that technological superiority, coupled with immense industrial capacity and relentless scientific innovation, had proven far more decisive than mere courage, skill, or resolve. These elements had reshaped the battlefield beneath the waves, altering the very fabric of undersea warfare. The saga of Germany's U-boat, its submarines' encounters with Allied sonar, stands as one of the clearest and most striking examples in history of how swiftly military technology can swing the strategic pendulum. When the war broke out in 1939, German submarines, or U-boats, enjoyed a stark advantage. When submerged, they were virtually invisible, detected only by chance or through egregious errors made by their pursuers. This invisibility granted them a deadly edge, turning the ocean into a perilous but seemingly safe hunting ground. However, by the year 1944, that once formidable advantage was eradicated through dramatic advancements in sonar technology. These sophisticated underwater listening devices could continuously track submerged submarines, calculating their movements across three-dimensional space, and guiding weapons with lethal precision. The undersea sanctuary, once thought to be impenetrable, had been dismantled through relentless applied science, engineering brilliance, and innovation. For the men serving on U-boat, this technological revolution represented more than a calculated tactical defeat. It embodied a profound psychological upheaval. In the initial phases of the conflict, submariners embarked upon their voyages as invisible hunters, confident in their ability to strike swiftly and vanish without a trace. By the war's end, they had become the hunted, marked prey that could be detected at any moment, relentlessly pursued across the ocean's depths. The sound of sonar pings resonating through their hulls, an unmistakable metallic echo, became an auditory signature not only of their equipment's effectiveness but also of their obsolescence. The once undetectable submarine had been rendered vulnerable, exposed to a new era of undersea combat where no place was truly safe. The consequences of this technological upheaval extended far beyond individual vessels. They had decisive strategic implications. The ability to hunt and destroy U-boats effectively curtailed the guiltless flow of vital supplies, food, weapons, and raw materials that Britain depended upon for survival. By March of 1943, British imports had plummeted to critically low levels, threatening the very foundation of the island nation's war effort. Yet, as Allied sonar technology advanced and the effectiveness of German submarines declined, these vital maritime lifelines began to recover, revitalized by the turning tide of technological superiority. Meanwhile, the tremendous buildup of American forces in Britain, aimed at launching the D-Day invasion, proceeded largely unhindered. The Atlantic supply route, which Winston Churchill famously described as the only thing that truly terrified him during the entire war, was finally secured. The German attempt to choke Britain through a blockade of submarines had failed, defeated not solely through traditional naval tactics like depth charges and aircraft but decisively through the relentless march of technological innovation. In the ultimate analysis, the tale of German U-boat crews confronting Allied sonar systems is a story woven throughout with themes of technological surprise, adaptation, failure, and eventual defeat. These submariners had entered the war confident in their ability to remain unseen beneath the waves, a confidence rooted in the supposed invincibility of their stealth. Yet, by the war's conclusion, they had become the most casualty-prone military service of any nation, their initial arrogance shattered by the relentless advance of detection technology. Between those 2 points in history, hundreds of thousands of individual tragedies unfolded, men swallowed by the icy depths of the Atlantic in iron coffins, victims of a technological race they were powerless to win. The most tangible sign of this revolution was the sound that now defined submarine warfare, the sharp, metallic ping of sonar pulses striking steel hulls. That sound carried a clear and unambiguous message. The ocean, once believed to be a refuge of concealment, was no longer a sanctuary. Surface technology had reached into the depths, breaking the myth of underwater invisibility. No place was safe. No hiding spot was secure. For the crews of German submarines, this message arrived too late to save their lives but in time to profoundly influence submarine doctrine forever. Their harrowing experience, paid for with a casualty rate exceeding 75%, served as a grim lesson to navies worldwide. Underwater warfare had been fundamentally transformed. Invisibility was no longer a guaranteed advantage. Detection was now an ever-present threat, reshaping strategies, tactics, and the very understanding of what undersea combat could and would become in the future. In the realm of modern warfare, the line between victory and defeat often hinges on the unyielding march of technological progress. Long ago, in the year 1940, German submarines, or U-boats as they were famously called, faced an ominous discovery that threatened to dismantle their dominance beneath the vast oceanic expanses. Those commanders, who navigated their vessels through treacherous waters, had already glimpsed a looming horizon where their stealth could be compromised, and the era of unchallenged submarine supremacy might come to an abrupt end. This forewarning was embedded in the haunting sound of sonar pings, sharp, metallic echoes reverberating through the depths, signaling the presence of an enemy seeking to destroy their stealthy domain. The legacy of those piercing signals remains indelibly etched into the collective memory of maritime warfare. Every modern submarine, whether patrolling deep beneath the seas or lurking in the shadows, lives with the echoes of that past menace. These sounds serve as a stark reminder that detection systems, sophisticated arrays of sonar and electronic sensors, have evolved to hunt stealth with relentless precision. Likewise, military doctrines worldwide continue to grapple with the eternal duel between concealment and discovery. In this ongoing cat-and-mouse game, the crews of submarines who first heard the terrible, metallic ringing strike their hulls paid dearly, sacrificing their lives in a desperate act of resistance. Their tragic yet instructive sacrifice teaches a timeless lesson: that technological advancements reach beyond mere hardware, shaping the very fabric of naval warfare and rendering traditional notions of bravado and craftiness secondary in importance. Technology advances at a breakneck speed, often outpacing the development of training programs, tactical doctrines, and even the courage of individual sailors and commanders. Those who fail to adapt to these rapid shifts, who cling to outdated tactics or underestimate new detection methods, do not merely lose individual skirmishes or battles. More often, they face the devastating loss of entire campaigns, the collapse of strategic objectives, and sometimes, the ultimate sacrifice of their lives. The consequences of neglecting technological change can be brutal and unforgiving, especially in the high-stakes environment of modern naval warfare. Beneath the ocean surface lie countless wrecks, metal coffins resting on the seabed, each one a silent monument to sailors who learned too late that science had robbed the ocean of its sanctuary. Their stories are haunting echoes of a profound truth. In contemporary combat, technological superiority is often the decisive factor that determines the outcome of conflicts more than the valor, tactics, or traditional virtues of military service. It is the edge that can turn the tide of battle in an instant, rendering old methods obsolete and elevating technological prowess to a position of unparalleled strategic importance. In the years of the Second World War, the Allied forces harnessed the power of advanced sonar technology, a tool that ultimately proved more impactful than the torpedoes themselves, more influential than the bravery of sailors on both sides, and even more decisive than tactical genius. It was precisely that victory in detection that eradicated the German U-boat threat, tipping the balance in favor of the Allies and sealing their dominance in the Atlantic theater. For those sailors patrolling the dark depths, that relentless, high-pitched pinging was more than just a sound. It was the harbinger of a fundamental transformation. It marked their transition from being the hunters lurking unseen beneath the waves to becoming the hunted, exposed by the very technology meant to conceal and protect. It betrayed their assumed invisibility, transforming them from confident predators into vulnerable prey caught in the unforgiving grasp of scientific progress they could not outrun or outfight. Thus, the persistent sound of the sonar represents not merely a technological achievement but a stark symbol of the inexorable evolution of warfare, where progress renders old tactics obsolete and redefines the very nature of conflict at sea. It stands as a testament to how innovation, when wielded with precision and foresight, can decisively shape the course of history, turning the tides of battle and fundamentally altering the balance of power.